Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our live stream mentorship session on food waste hosted by CareersNOW and FoodGrads. My name is Nicole Gallace, and I am a Talent Solutions Manager with FoodGrads. And I'm joined today by Chevelle Clark, who is our FoodGrads Campus Ambassador and is a current student at Niagara College in the Culinary Innovation and Food Technology program. And our main speaker today is Dimitri. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to allow you to go ahead and introduce yourself and a little bit about how you started in this industry, your education, some of the roles you've had. And I know you have an amazing presentation. The focus being food waste, but the fact that enterprise success can also serve as a force for good. And I know that appeals to a lot of our students and graduates that are interested in the food industry. And at the end of your presentation, we'll answer any questions that you have. And Chevelle, I know that you might have a couple to ask at the end. And obviously at the end there, feel free to chime in and certainly add any introductions you want to make about yourself. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Dimitri. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, for that warm introduction. I appreciate it. Certainly honored to be here today with you folks. Just to give you a little bit of insights about myself. So I've been in the food chain / supply chain industry for the past probably almost 17 years now. I started off back in logistics, looking after the Sobeys distribution, DSD, over to their storefronts. So I did that for about 4 years. With my critical leading role within logistics over at Sobeys, I had the opportunity to move over to an organization which is a national dairy cooperative here in Canada called Dole Foods. Started off as a transportation manager because of the previous life experience that I had with Sobeys. Did that for a couple of years, moved on to through organizational continued growth at Dole Foods. I moved into a procurement role. So I was responsible for all of the bill of material procurement, packaging, ingredients, services, service providers, some elements of IT in that equation. I did that for a couple of years as the organization continued to grow and evolve. I moved into a director of supply chain level role, again, end-to-end capabilities, looking after warehousing, production planning, supply and demand, forecasting, logistics, transportation, any pillar of supply chain that you can think of in that equation. So I was with Dole for about 10 years, and then an opportunity came along to join Dole. They were looking for someone to come in through a transformational lens, look at their supply chain that was end to end. Dole is a globalized organization. Most of our production takes place in Asia Pacific. Again, unfortunately, pineapples don't grow in Canada. We harvest our product over in the Philippines and Thailand, and then we do have some co-manufacturing agreements that are worldwide as well. Interesting fun fact, not a lot of folks know, but it takes somewhere between 18 to 20 months to harvest a pineapple. It's a very long harvesting supply chain. So very, very critical that we're forecasting and planning and making sure that we understand, what the global demand is in terms of our enterprise. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. Just before we begin the presentation, one of the themes for today's mentorship session would be not just looking at it from a careers perspective and a roles perspective, but really how can you carve out your own brand, your own personal love within the food industry, and what can you do slightly something different? For me, that's food waste. These are some of the elements that I touch upon within my role. And again, without further ado, if we get into the presentation, I'm hoping that I can share some experiences, some insights with that, and inspire others, what they could do differently within their roles and look at it from a slightly different lens.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to this.
Perfect. So the presentation I'm going to be talking about is tackling food waste and insecurity issues. And again, just looking at supply chain's role in food inflation. Again, these are social causes that everybody experiences in any marketplace. And I think these are prevalent subjects that are really front and center today in the global world of supply chain, but also in consumer households. And I want to just correlate that to my role and the influence that I have on those themes. Okay, so I'm going to get into the first slide here. First, we'll talk about the agenda for today's session. I'll do a quick intro. We'll talk about the impact of food waste, talk about some of the strategies that folks could deploy in terms of combating the food waste, addressing social food insecurity. There's obviously technology that could be leveraged to mitigate food insecurity and food waste. And I want to also touch upon the element of over-engineered supply chains and touch upon over-engineering products. So some of you may be going into careers in supply chain, marketing, product development, and all of these themes are transferable to any specific role that you will be endeavoring on. And obviously the impact of food inflation and how it has a larger impact on society in general. Okay. So first I'll start with the introduction. These are just some food waste statistics that exist in the world today. Approximately 1/3 of all food produced globally is wasted, okay? And 1/3 of that is wasted through supply chain. It continues to intensify the environmental challenges because a lot of this food waste ends up in landfills and it produces CO2. When it produces CO2, obviously we have some climate impacts from an environmental perspective, but also societal challenges. Social food waste insecurity affects 690 million people worldwide. If you think about how much food waste we produce, we should not have any food insecurity. It's a global epidemic, but then we have the source, we have the solution. It's about repurposing. What could we do differently? And it just breaks my heart just to understand how many people are, suffering through hunger, accessing food banks. And these are critical gaps that folks are experiencing today worldwide. Another major component of this is over-engineering impacts. The complexities of supply chains today through globalization that has taken place over the last few decades, they're very complex. We're moving products from Asia Pacific. There's ocean freight, drayage, intermodal, multimodal programs in place. A lot of warehouses that exist. You're moving product 10 times over just to get to that customer. So if you could just think of Amazon, which is a really simple example here, how many distribution centers do they have to make sure that you're getting your product next day? Right? And it's about marrying up that demand. Even from a Dole perspective, we're trying to position our warehouses to customer specific density to minimize the amount of time that the product travels through our ecosystem to the customer. But it also adds a layer of complexity. When we're engineering products out there, and again, for those food grads that are going into product development or marketing or trying to create, I guess the theme that I really want to highlight is simple is better. When you're adding stabilizers or ingredients or adding complexity, again, because one of the elements that you're fighting for is you want to extend that shelf life. You want to make sure that you have the maximum ability to work through that product in your supply chain. But at the same time, when you're adding complexity, it adds a layer of inflation, a layer of cost, and all those contributors are changing throughout each year, whether it's through CPI increases or whatever other implication that could arise. Okay. Next. These are some interesting facts that I've taken out from food waste. So environmental consequences. Food waste significantly contributes to greenhouse gases, as we talked about, because most of the food ends up in landfills. Economic costs. Globally, food waste incurs about an economic loss of about $1 trillion. That's phenomenal. Think about repurposing those funds into other social causes, whether it's homelessness or food insecurity, or creating other programs that maybe the elderly, or there is a ton of social issues out there that I'm sure that you could correlate to. Benefits of food reduction. Reducing food waste can enhance resource efficiency. It could improve sustainability and economic benefits for communities. I want to talk about some of these change the facts. We have a campaign out there that's called Change the Facts, and these are really prevalent subjects. There is enough food to feed 3 billion people annually, yet 925 million people go hungry. I'm going to pause there for a second for you to absorb that. 3 billion tons of food waste and 925 million people. And again, just coming back to this, there's more than enough food waste out there, if repurposed accordingly, could solve food insecurity issues globally. In the US alone, 108 billion pounds of food is wasted. 42 million people in the US go hungry. The same type of statistics exist in the Canadian market. If you just go into some of the food banks websites that they have, very similar statistics. In the US, $161 billion worth of food is thrown out yearly from a dollar's perspective. And again, 42 million people. Think about that dollar repurposing. If you take $161 billion and repurpose it against 42 million people, there should be no homelessness or food insecurity issues. Again, that correlates down to the Canadian market. It's the exact same statistics based on the same size. Again, our population is 40 million, roughly, to 380 some odd million people. But again, very similar transferable statistics. 33.3% of the food produced globally is wasted, as we talked about on the intro slide. But again, 2 billion people face food insecurity issues. We have the product, but how can you change the facts? And this is what I'm hoping to inspire you through today's mentorship session, just to kind of introduce you to some of these issues that are happening, some of the product availability, and how can you think differently as you work through your careers and touch upon some of these elements. Moving on to the next slide here. Some of the strategies to combat food waste through supply chain. Again, I'm going to be talking mostly through the supply chain lens, but again, these themes and these topics are transferable to any type of position, because you're going to have touch points throughout your position where you can influence some of these purpose-driven decision-making skills. What we do is we have an enhanced inventory management system. And again, if you don't, there are some accessible systems out there that companies could deploy, but implementing a robust inventory management practice minimizes food waste. If you can marry up your forecasting, demand, and supply accordingly in that equation, you could definitely influence the amount of food waste that exists. I know there's going to be prevalent variables in the marketplace, such as consumer changing habits, inflationary spending, basket size changes, competition that comes in and competes in the same category that you're selling product in. Nonetheless, if you're a little bit more proactive in terms of analyzing some of these prevalent issues or variables, you could definitely improve on your supply and demand correlation in your equation. Again, improve forecasting techniques. I briefly touched upon this in the inventory management side. We have a system called Blue Yonder. Blue Yonder allows us to do advanced forecasting analytics, where it takes all these variables, all these inputs, takes all the information that we feed the system, and provides us an analytical output. And again, leveraging technology is also very important to how you steward your organization. And again, finally, I touched upon this a little bit, but the utilization of technology with AI capabilities, predictive analytics, it will streamline your operations and your decision-making process in any type of field that you're in. So again, be open to networking, be open to looking at solutions, join business forums. There is always something new up and coming that organizations or individuals could leverage through their roles to help them in the decision-making process. Moving on to the next slide here. Addressing social food insecurity. One of the most important elements of addressing social food insecurity is strategic partnerships. One of the things that I take pride on is Dole has created within the Canadian market a zero waste ecosystem. What we had done is, through leveraging the technology that we have, through strategic partnerships with food banks and community partners, we had actually, over the last 18 to 24 months, repurposed 100% of our excess and obsolete product. So yay for Dole, no food waste for the last 2 years. There is actually a noteworthy article out there, if you care to Google, and you just type in Google zero food waste insecurity for Dole. We had repurposed over 300 1,000 pounds of product over the last 18 months, which created over 1 million servings. And again, the change starts with you folks. For anybody that's viewing this particular presentation here, it starts with you. And I'm hoping to inspire each and every one of you. What can you do through your leading and critical roles to do things a little bit differently? For me, it was the strategic partnerships, the surplus food redistribution. So we created a push system. We leveraged our Internet of Things, our technology, our software, where we were looking at the life cycle of our product. Once it hit a certain date code, a certain life cycle range, we actually pushed that product automatically to our food partnerships, the food banks that we dealt with from a coast-to-coast perspective. There is other collaborative initiatives that you can undertake. It could be a community engagement initiative, as an example. School programs. We don't have a national school food program here in Canada. I know there is a little bit of legislation being tabled right now. In the US, there is one, but in Canada, there isn't one. Start small, start local. Partner with certain schools, donate some of that excess and obsolete product. There are communities that are really hurting out there. And if you could leverage that, it's a win-win situation for the enterprise and for the community. Just to take a little step back, for Dole, for a supply chain professional, if I have to destroy that product, there is a lot of capital required to throw out or destroy those goods. But by repurposing, I'm saving dollars for the organization, but at the same time addressing social causes. So again, looking at that end-to-end supply chain, looking at that end-to-end touch point that you have within your careers, I think it's very, very important as you navigate. Okay. Continuing on here. Technology's role in mitigating food insecurity. Efficiency through data analytics. Data integrity is one of the most important elements in the equation as you steer to make decisions. Technology data-driven platforms out there are only as good as the inputs that you provide into it. And again, we talked about briefly what Dole had orchestrated in the sense of pushing product to its partners, but leverage that technology, be proactive. It exists out there to help you in your decision-making process. And I think it's very, very critical that we're not passive about it, but really understand what exists out there. One of the things that I did want to mention, I work with a couple of different peers and colleagues globally on social causes. And there was this very creative innovation. I don't have the name top of mind, but this was stewarded in the California market, where food insecurity and homelessness is a top topic in that jurisdiction. What they had done is they created an app for quick service restaurants, fast food restaurants. If they had any leftovers, they would ping those that are food insecure with a sense of dignity, where they can come in and pick up that meal pro bono with a sense of dignity. And I thought that was really creative. They created something simple where these QSRs could ping individuals that are food insecure in the community, and they can come in and grab those meals free of charge. So again, it's really thinking above and beyond, even if it doesn't exist in your role or in your organization. How can you leverage and steward and create those business cases to create something new and unique by repurposing something that could be waste or could be a social cause that you can address? I know there is companies out there in the shipping industry that are taking older containers that are at the end of their life cycle, refurbishing those containers and creating mini modular homes and mini modular communities to address the unhoused, essentially. And I think that's another really creative way to kind of address social causes. Again, I'm speaking from the lens of supply chain, but I'm sure that you folks could, regardless of which career you go into within the food industry, there is elements that you can touch upon and address. And that could be a form of your own personalized branding as well, where you're doing something beyond the enterprise. And that also elevates the brand awareness. And I think we're at a critical inflection point today where folks have to think beyond their careers in terms of what they can bring to the table here. Moving on to the next slide. I want to spend some time, a few minutes here about talking about over-engineered supply chains. And I'm not simply talking about the complex networks that exist, whether it's the strategic placement of your distribution sites, the movement of your product, how you handle it, whether it's over the road, over the rail, sea logistics. Obviously, there is efficiencies in terms of whether you ship stuff by air, by sea, by rail. Each one of those transportation methods has its own unique carbon footprint. But really what I want to hone into is, let's talk about the product element for now to start. You need to apply your technical engineering knowledge. And I'll give you an example of some previous past experiences that I've had in my previous life. When I used to work on corrugated projects, for instance, if you understand that the product inside butter in my dairy days, it's frozen, it's got integrity. So again, you don't really need an extremely strong outer shipper for something like that as you're procuring your corrugate or your outer shipper. So from a technical engineering expertise, what you can do is reduce the flute size of your corrugate, drive efficiency, but at the same time reduce your pulp and paper usage. So this is an element of over-engineering a specific product. Again, people want to keep some items that are generic and unique, but at the same time, if you can dig in and put in your engineering hat on, I think you can drive food inflation way down by reducing some of those complexities. Another element would be tin, as an example. Do you really need something that has X amount of grams of steel, or can you reduce and make it a little bit thinner? If you reduce the amount of tin, you could reduce the amount of specific material that goes into the production of that specific packaging. And again, reduce the contributors to food inflation, because everything is trickling up. Every single commodity that you can think of has a price implication today. When you're developing products, another primary example, when you're engineering the ingredient stack, where are you sourcing those ingredients from? What are you adding? Can your supply chain be a factor of quicker accessibility to that product, so you don't need to add the extensive stabilizers and make the ingredient deck extremely complex? Again, these are just generalized themes, but I'm hoping to inspire you to start thinking about it from a really different perspective in terms of what can you influence in your food career. Okay. Just coming back to supply chain, some of the things that we had done is we reviewed our supply chain network from a Dole's perspective, and we actually went from 5 or 6 different warehouses that we had over the last 24 months down to 2. The reason we did that is because we wanted to reduce our complexity. We wanted to reduce the amount of product sitting in different marketplaces or different regions of the Canadian geography. Now think about it. If you have a slowdown in a specific region, you're double handling that product. You have to take it out of one distribution warehouse, move it to another to service another market. By reducing and simplifying, we were able to reduce our carbon footprint because we're not moving product around as much. And again, there's environmental benefits that translate through that. Cost increase factors. Adding layers of complexity, in my experience, always has added a layer of cost. To gain that efficiency through adding complexity, moving your DCs closer to the marketplace. And I'm talking about inland. I'm not specifically referring to right now nearshoring or offshoring. This is more when you're dealing within the marketplace. Simple is better. I think that goes a longer way. And if folks start to understand the end-to-end total cost ownership of that equation, there's definitely inefficiencies that existed. So I'm a strong believer, just to wrap up the slide, I am a strong believer of simple is better. Next slide. Impact on food inflation. Drivers of food inflation. Factors such as supply chain disruptions, over-engineered products and their respective inputs, complexity due to convenience factors. Again, all of these issues you're going to be dealing with a consistent basis. If there's one theme that I can stress across the table today, and again, just as we talked about in the previous slide, simple is better. Break it down, go to the basics, look at the inputs, and you will definitely find elements that you can take out of the equation, simplify your processes and your workflows, your products, your networks, and there will definitely be opportunities of efficiency and social causes that you could address. Consumer behavior insights. Inflation also leads to altering consumer purchasing habits. The complexity influences inflation. It influences the consumer habits. It reduces the basket sizes, so people are spending the same amount of money today, and that's a very prevalent topic in the inflationary stage that we are in, but they're buying less because those cost of goods are going up. So my job, or at least what I'm focusing on within our network, is how do I make that product more accessible, but at the same time more cost effective through the enterprise? Because the greater reach, the greater accessibility to our product, we're solving food insecurity, malnutrition, and accessibility. Sunshine, as our logo says, sunshine for all. Excuse me for a sec. I'm just going to grab us up here. Supply chain effects. Food inflation pressures supply chains to adapt rapidly. So again, if you have a very complex network, you consistently have to evolve it or adapt, change your pricing strategies, operational decisions more fluidly. So for me, again, it's simplifying, and I found that throughout my career to work a lot better. Okay. Conclusion. I really just want to kind of re-summarize everything and bring in everything and tie it all together. Supply chain roles then versus now. Traditional roles in supply chain historically have focused on ensuring that the efficient movement of goods from suppliers to consumers, emphasizing on cost control, inventory management, and logistics optimization. And that still is the case, but today it's evolving. Modern supply chains today have a role of a social element to it, ESG element to it. They face broader issues on resilience, sustainability. There's greater focus on responsibility. Supply chain, as an example, within the food space is no longer just a cost center. It's actually an element of change. It can influence decision making. It's got a greater seat and a greater lens at the table. There's a couple of hashtags that I want to call out here. Focus on data-driven decisions. Focus on sustainability and ethical practices. Focus on crisis management. So again, if you think about being proactive as opposed to reactive, you could definitely do a lot of change in the industry, regardless of which role that you're in. Addressing food insecurity and food inflation through supply chain roles. You need to understand that we wear many different hats, and our decisions have a cause and effect. Think about the influence that you have beyond the logistics and the distribution challenges, with a growing focus on tackling food insecurity and food inflation. And again, this translates to any role that you're going into. If you're going to be in product development, think about how you're engineering that product. Where are you sourcing those bill of materials? Where is it being manufactured? Think about from a marketing standpoint, if you're going out there and you're marketing your product, who the audience is. Can you leverage any of your marketing programs to address social causes and get messages out? It doesn't necessarily have to be a tangible element. It could also be electronic element or an AI element or a marketing theme. Over-engineering and push for simplification. Again, this is one of the themes that I had shared through the presentation. Again, simplify. Go down to the basics. You will find that as organizations evolve through the industrial era in the last couple of decades, folks added a lot of complexity that is unnecessary. Simple is better. And from a leadership standpoint, the last point that I want to kind of leave on the table is walk the talk with purpose-driven decision making. Again, make sure that you're driving social change. And if you're able to curate that, I think that's going to be a form of personal branding. But at the same time, it's going to steward you in your career to put you on a level that's a little bit different than other folks that are competing for the same roles. I'm going to pause here for questions and a discussion.
Yeah, that's so much to think about. And first of all, congratulations to Dole for 2 years of no food waste. I mean, that's incredible. And obviously you're leading the charge there. We do have some questions in the chat, but I wanted to give Chevelle a chance to ask her questions. She sat there patiently listening to the conversation. So you go ahead and ask any questions you have, and then we'll go to the comments in the chat.
Hi, thank you so much, Dimitri, for really giving us some very good insights on how to reduce waste, especially as future professionals going in the industry, having to think more efficiently when we do various activities. Currently, I am a research assistant at the Food and Beverage Innovation Center. So I really resonated when you were saying with when we are doing product development, having to really think about where is it that we are trying to source or ingredients from, because it really makes a difference at the end, especially for our clients, to ensure that the supply chain is as short as possible. Um, Going into more of what you were trying to say of supply and demand, right? Trying to equalize between the two, as I am trying to change over into production supervisor in the future. And I was hoping you could give us a little bit more feedback or things that we should be looking out for as a production supervisor. How can we work to help to reduce waste on our production lines?
Most certainly. So again, from a production standpoint, there is an element or a factor called yield. Okay. Um, and I guess what I'm trying to articulate here is there is always going to be a waste factor within the production cycle. So if you're batching product, the tanks don't get necessarily emptied right out because there's a minimum quantity for the batch production, and your forecast might only require X where your minimum output is X. So again, one of the things that typically happens within production environments is that product typically gets dumped, because if there's excess and obsolete, from a costing perspective, the individual that's purchasing that volume still pays for it, but the excess and obsolete yield gets dumped. One of the things that you could look at it from a lens is if that excess and obsolete inventory or yield does exist, what you can do is you can pack it in a generic format. Again, you have to go through the quality standards because, again, it meets the guidelines what you're packing for whichever product. But from a brand perspective, you might not necessarily be able to repurpose it through a brand because there are some sensitivities around that. But it could be repurposed through a generic way. Still pack that food and repurpose it. Don't eat it, right? Kind of, I guess, is what I'm trying to articulate here is more from a private label organizational approach than from a branded approach. That's one element that you could look at it. But then at the same time, look at your processes, look at your production cycle. What's happening? Are the batch tanks too large? Are your minimum? Do you have some sort of inefficiencies? Can you simplify? Can you work with your customer or your internal stakeholders to stress the minimum order quantity that's required on the production line? So that's correlated. Because it's not about just what the production can do, but it's also about making sure that all those elements are integrated throughout the entire workflow. What supply chain wants, what the customer wants, and putting those guardrails to a certain extent in place. But again, if excess and obsolete arises, making sure that you can repurpose that. Hopefully that touches on some elements of your question.
Yes, yes, it did. Thank you. Thank you.
We have a couple more here. So, what are the large grocery chains doing about surplus fruit and other food waste, I guess? Are you aware of that?
I am not 100% aware how they're repurposing their product. The one thing that I can share is about our supply chain that may ask, because I see some of the questions here, what about the quality assurance and safety within the food and repurpose chain? So maybe I can just share some insights a little bit more about how that happens. In the food chain of things, there is something called a customer mapping policy. So all the large grocery chains out there have a minimum shelf life that we need to provide their chains, their networks with in terms of product shelf life or best before dates. In our case, from a Dole perspective, our minimum shelf life requirement is 90 days. So in our equation, if the product has less than 90 days, it's considered waste. So think about it. The product has 3 months of shelf life and it's classified as waste in our ecosystem. And this is what I'm doing differently. Once that product is classified as waste, still has 90 days, perfectly good product. It's been shelf life tested. We do rigorous shelf life testing every single year from a quality assurance standpoint to make sure that it does hold up to the best before dates that we label our products with. I have 3 months to move that product to the community partners well in advance so it can make it into the hands of those that are food insecure and those that are in need. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. There's another. I've got so many questions going through my and we will. I'll go to the comments in the chat. But what are the conversations that happen in your house? Because I know in my house, as soon as some of my family members see a best before date, they literally throw it out. They have no interest in even hearing me out when I say, you can still. It's fine still. There's certain rules around that. So rather than me speaking, what are the conversations that happen in your house around best before dates and that sort of conversation from the products you buy at the grocery store?
Yeah. So are you asking from a personal element or from a enterprise perspective?
I guess both.
Okay. So I'll start with the enterprise perspective. The conversations that we have, again, when we're developing the best before dates, obviously we have to make sure that 100% of the product that's tested does hold up the test of time. Okay. Mm-hmm. So whatever we put, the best before dates, and again, to your point, we're not talking about right now from a food safety perspective. Mm-hmm. There is also elements of, so we package our foods. There is the level of crunchiness in some of our products because we do dehydrated fruits. There is a level of discoloration that may occur. Nothing wrong from a food safety perspective, but we're making sure that the product stands up to 100% of the quality that Dole represents. And that's the best before date element. From a food safety perspective, from an enterprise perspective as well, Nicole, to your point, it goes well beyond the best before date, well beyond. So can that food be safely consumed for another probably 2 to 3 months, well beyond the best before date? Absolutely. But again, what I'm trying to do is proactive redistribution. I'm trying to repurpose that excess and obsolete inventory well in advance to those in need before there is any type of quality implications. Mm-hmm. So they're getting the exact same product that ends up on the shelf, and there is no loss of color or quality or taste or texture or any type of element that's visual or from a taste profile that one could experience. So they're getting the exact same product that any paying consumer would get out there.
Gotcha. And we have a question here. I think you've kind of addressed the quality assurance issues here. If at the production line there was a mistake, what would your comments be around that? So how would we reduce waste in finishing production which has a little mistake? So I think you understand what they're asking. If there was a small mistake in the production line, what would you do with that batch?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So a lot of times that could happen. Let's say you've had a misstep in the formulation or in the batching process. You added too much sugar, not enough sugar. I'm just being simple here in terms of the ingredients that go into a certain formulation. Again, if that product is safe to be consumed, I would put it under an organizational private label approach, basically an unlabeled approach, and work with community partners where you could repurpose that. Why not create a private label brand that's called the Greater Vancouver Food Bank, as an example, or Second Harvest in Toronto, as an example, and have those specific, they're perfectly good products. There is nothing wrong with them. I understand the ingredient deck implication where it could have slightly, an extra couple of grams of sugar. And I do understand the whole notion of lower sugars is much healthier for us. But if we come back to the theme of if that person eats today or not, I think that the misstep in production in terms of a formulational batching, yields a greater purpose if we still repurpose that product as opposed to dumping it.
Yeah, absolutely. I have more questions. Siobhan, wave at me if you have questions, but I'll just keep going. I love what you talked about with regards to personal branding and We know that 96% of companies in the food and beverage processing space are, they're small and medium sized. If someone's just started in a role in their company or has not started in a position yet, maybe they're a new grad and just looking for opportunities. But let's take the first example. They're in a company and there's no one looking at food waste. There's no one that's spearheading those initiatives. Let's just make it easy. What would the 3 steps be that you would say that this individual can do? They see the problems, they see maybe some of the solutions that they could at least start to work on. I mean, they're not going to save everything, and especially if you have an owner or a management that doesn't seem bothered, that things are ticking along nicely and it's not a focus for them. What are the 3 pieces of steps, if you will, that you could share?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk about the framework that I have, or the methodology. Anytime that I'm trying to address something purpose-driven or a social cause or anything like that, the first step is you need to understand your audience, right? Who are you pitching these ideas to? Is it a CFO? Is it a supply chain director? Is it a production manager, a production supervisor? You really need to understand who the audience is. Then you need to basically tie it in. It's got to be a win-win situation, or at least that's the way that it is a lot easier to get it across the finish line. If you can kind of correlate what the enterprise is going to gain out of this, the enterprise value, and it doesn't necessarily have to correlate to cost or a monetary element, but if you can correlate, hey, I'm going to enhance our brand awareness, or we're going to get messages out, or we're going to address social causes, and that's a benefit to the organization. Obviously, the monetary element is a lot easier to kind of get across the finish line. Like in my particular case, I built business cases. So we had a sizable destruction cost budget. And I'm like, wait, why am I throwing all these dollars out to destroy this perfectly good and nutritious product when it could be repurposed and redistributed to those in need? So I had to build a business case, get the leadership team involved alongside myself, stress that out. And then, as these winnings, both internally and externally, it's a dual intent, right? So again, in simple terms, it's about knowing your audience, carving out, narrating the story according to the audience, and creating a win-win solution. Those would be the 3 steps in the equation.
That's, it's so helpful. And also, I think employers don't realize, or perhaps it's not on their radar so much, that these types of initiatives will attract employees, that, will attract the next generation of workforce, because there is research out there. So, there's a lot of data to prove that young people today, they obviously need to pay the rent and pay for food and bills, but that notion of purpose and bringing value and making an impact is huge. And we know that the work we've done through CareersNOW and FoodGrads. So I think it's so important that employers have this as part of their strategy. Now, you've talked, obviously you're spearheading all these initiatives at Dole. Are there any other food companies that you admire that are doing great work in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So my previous employer, for instance, Gallace Foods, is a very known advocate to donate product, repurpose some of its excess and obsolete inventory. I would probably say I can't speak from the retail lens perspective, but certainly from a farming perspective, from a manufacturing standpoint, from a distributor standpoint, working with our food banks, community partners, I see a lot of this happening. I think that they are cognizant of the issues that our communities are experiencing, and a lot of people are starting to step up. But again, it takes one. So one story to get out there for others to follow in suit. So the one thing that I'm trying to inspire folks that are on this call is change starts with you. Even though that, there may not necessarily be someone that's doing it in that particular space or that equation or that workflow, start with yourself, get that story across the finish line, inspire others. It starts to open up a world of wonders for sure.
And it gives you out of bed in the morning. If you have a purpose in your job and you're doing good work, I think I'm more seasoned in my career. I can't stress that enough. if you can see the bigger picture of what you're doing and how it can impact others, it doesn't all become about a paycheck at the end of the day. So yeah, you've shared so many inspiring ideas and thoughts. Chevelle, do you have any other questions at this point that you want to ask?
No, I think every time I have a question in my head, he answers it.
He's anticipating, yeah.
Anticipating what I was going to ask. But what I would like to say, it's very commendatory that you are actually out here really pushing these initiatives. And I hope that not only like food manufacturing companies, but also educational institutions can instill some of these thought processes in the mind of their students. So we can have the graduates going out already fashioned to look at food waste and fashioned to find various ways. As you say, simpler is better. Doing things much simpler. I know in this climate, everybody's trying to push to be probably the best or to be forward. And we might be using innovative ways that will make the supply chain more complex than it actually needs to be. So just to sit back and look at how to make things a little bit simpler and how we can put ourselves out there besides our regular day-to-day jobs, even if you're not in the food industry, volunteering with the food banks and things like these, and find ways in which we can help to contribute or give back to our communities by feeding those who are experiencing challenges with food insecurity. So commend you a lot for what you are doing, and I hope you continue to just expand and make this thing better.
The one thing that I do want to kind of jump in and quickly just build upon, you've mentioned the education. Okay. That's one element that I haven't touched upon. I think it's very imperative for individuals to continuously invest in themselves. I'm a strong believer of that. I hold an MBA from Richard Ivey. I hold 3 different designations: CCLP, SCMP, another CSCL, which is from NICSCL. There's a lot of acronyms out there. I apologize. And I'm a strong believer that folks, if they want to stand out within their careers, they need to continuously invest in themselves. It's not just their personal branding, it's their technical aptitude, it's their skills, it's their knowledge. Education is very forefront. It allows you to network with your peers. That's how you start off, by building your network, because in that alumni, in that consortium, in that environment that you're training, individuals, again, start to go to work for different organizations or different enterprises. And again, it's not about just finishing your education, but continuing to stay abreast and in touch with those folks and your peers and your colleagues, and just understanding what they're doing, what their organizations are doing. But that starts off through education. And then as you work through your career, it's the business forums, it's the networking, it's the continuous investment into your education and your career. It's not just about a job, because you need to think about it from an entrepreneurial standpoint. You're here to solve problems. You're here to solve social issues. You're here to enhance the enterprise value. But if you're going to treat it as just a job and it's just a paycheck, it's going to be very difficult for you to do this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years in your career. So one of the things, again, just to kind of, I know I'm running on about or rambling about this a little bit, but every step of your journey is important, from education to your career, to your continued investment into your education, coming back to those institutions and making sure that you're continuously evolving if you want to stay competitive. There's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of seasoned individuals, very experienced individuals, but you have to have that frame of thought. What could I do differently to make myself stand out?
I'm so glad you said that, because there are a lot of influencers out there, on TikTok and other platforms, saying you don't need a degree anymore. You don't need to go to college. You don't need training. Just get out there and start living life and do the job. And I think some individuals are going to get away with that, but I'm a recruiter as well as doing these, leading the FoodGrads brand. And I'm telling you now, employers are still looking for education. They're still asking for degrees in certain areas or college diplomas. It's not gone away. The education piece is not going away. So I'm so pleased that you said that. And Chevelle, I'm hoping that you will continue to spread this word. We love that you joined us today as a campus ambassador. That's part of the reason we are bringing campus ambassadors to these mentorship sessions, so you continue and talk to your peers about what you learned today and share this this recording with them. And most of all, Dimitri, thank you so much for your time. We could not do sessions like this without professionals like yourself, leaders like yourself that are passionate about what you're doing and want to share that with students and grads and job seekers in general that are looking to maybe change their career path. Thank you so much. I wanted to just add that if we have any job seekers out there, or students and grads that are looking for advice or content, resources, all of that sort of thing, please visit CareersNOW.ca. You can create your job seeker account. There is free training sessions available, training courses, I should say, is at 14, 15 of those. There's job fairs, there's other resources. We have a podcast. There's all sorts of things that you can, resources that you can access to learn, as Dimitri said, to continue investing in yourself and learning. So thank you so much. I'm so pleased. Look at this, 4 minutes to the hour, and we did it in an hour. I think we could do another hour with discussion, but I won't keep you. But thank you.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you. And thank you, Chevelle. I appreciate you joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Awesome.